All right. So, hi everyone. My name's Bob Goodman, and as Talia said, I had a heart transplant back in November, actually, of 2013, at the Hospital University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. So I want to tell you a little bit about my background, both personally and professionally, because I also think that that has a bearing on how and why I decided to, as part of my giving back, wanted to get involved with UNOS and the Organ Procurement and Transplant Network, the OPTN. And then we're going to answer the question, what's UNOS? Brian is going to do it in a much more formal, much more informative way. And I'm going to talk about it really more in the context of how did I first hear about it, and how that started my involvement, and ultimately what it means to me to be a part of it. Taya, next slide. So my background, very briefly on a personal basis, there definitely is heart disease in my family, and my father and both his brothers died of heart disease at relatively young ages, one at 50, my dad at 57, and his other brother at 60. And so I knew about that, obviously, and I set about doing things to try to prevent me from having a heart attack. And at the end of the day, actually, I was successful. I became a runner. I knew I had high cholesterol, so I kind of dealt with that and those kinds of things. So you know, I did the best that I could. And later on, I'll talk a little bit about why I ended up needing a heart transplant, and it was not because I had a heart attack. Professionally, I've worked in the healthcare industry for over 45 years. I am a former hospital administrator, including a hospital CEO. And during that period of time when I was doing that, which is about a third of my career or so, I actually, my first hospital was St. Barnabas Medical Center in Northern New Jersey. And among other jobs, at one point during the 77 to 79 timeframe, I actually was a dialysis and kidney transplant administrator. Who knew I'd need a transplant down the road? Clearly not me. And then subsequently, when I came to the Philadelphia area, I grew up in North Jersey and live in South Jersey. I went to work at Albert Einstein Medical Center in Philadelphia. Many of you on this call are aware of Einstein because many of you, I think, are from the Delaware Valley. And one of the things that I did as one of the C-suite administrators back in the 84, 85 timeframe was I was the senior person to help champion getting a liver transplant program approved for Einstein. We had to get the board approval of the hospital, and we also had to get the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I worked very closely with a surgeon who was a very, very dynamic individual. For those of you who have been to the Gift of Life House in Philadelphia, you've probably seen his portrait on the wall. His name is Aaron Bennett. Unfortunately, Aaron passed away a few years ago, but I worked very closely with Aaron. And I worked very closely as well at the time with a young guy, I was too at the time, a guy named Howard Nathan. And so Howard and I knew each other a little bit 35 or so years ago. And then through the rest of my career, I've spent time working in investment banking. I actually do now as well as finance and consulting for about 20 years. I'll talk a little bit more about some of this, how this came about, but I want to just share with you what I refer to as my giving back activities. I am on the Hospital University of Pennsylvania's Patient and Family Advisory Council, and I've been a member since November of 2014. Being a member of the Patient and Family Advisory Council has an absolute bearing on how I became involved with UNOS. I am also a member of the Philadelphia chapter of TRIO and have been since 2015. I am also involved in the American Heart Association in Central and Southern New Jersey. I've been a board member for a couple of years or so, and starting July 1st, I will be chairman of the board for that for that region. It's about 12, I think it's 12 of the 21 counties in the state of New Jersey. And then as a little sideline, I'm a little bit involved with the OPTN and UNOS, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that as well. Talia, can you move this forward? Thanks. So question for me, I think is a good, which is a good one, is why did I need a heart transplant if I've never had a heart attack? I developed, or whatever you want to call it, bradycardia back in 2008, which is very low heart rate. No one knew why. No one even tried to find out why per se. And, but it did result in me getting a pacemaker. I was in pretty good shape. I was a marathoner and a half marathoner and all that. And so my heart rate was usually about 58 or 60. 30 is not a good thing. And so that's about where I was. And after a very long and drawn out and difficult time period that lasted roughly 5 years or 4 years or so, I was transferred to the hospital, University of Pennsylvania, to see a particular electrophysiologist who had experience doing ablations that some of you may be familiar with, not only through the traditional method of through the groin, but also through the chest, because I had a lot of uncontrollable, key phrase, electrical activity in and around my heart. And the only way to get to around your heart is actually through your chest. And he was not successful in controlling that electricity or electrical activity. And so he said, I think you have cardiac sarcoidosis. And of course we said, what's that? And he said, oh, it's an autoimmune disease. And I said, how did I get that? And he said, it's idiopathic, which means that people do not know, the medical community does not know how people get this disease. So if you don't know if you don't know how people get it, it's really hard to treat it. It's extraordinarily rare. Sarcoidosis in and of itself is very rare. It can affect any organ in your body. And when it's cardiac only, you're extremely rare. I am what's referred to as an interesting patient. Not a particularly interesting guy, but an interesting patient, which is something you never, ever, ever want to be. And since it is so rare, they often don't consider it, and it is difficult at times to diagnose. It did result in me having heart failure, and I was ultimately admitted to the hospital at HUP in early part of November of 2013. And they said to me, you are not going home without a new heart. I did not really get an opportunity to absorb what that meant. I eventually did, but I was home and had the transplant. So I had end-stage heart disease, and I was considered a status 1A, E being exception. I was put on the transplant list on a Tuesday, was upgraded, so to speak, on Wednesday night, and Saturday night, nurse came in and said, we found you a heart. It's being flown in from Georgia. So if any of you see me with a Georgia baseball hat on, that's the reason. Not necessarily because I'm such a big fan of the Georgia Bulldogs, although they are a great football team. And so I had a transplant essentially 3-4 days later. And it's been a heck of a ride. So on with what is UNOS? Brian, back to you, my friend.
Thanks. I'm going to take a few minutes to describe sort of what, can we go back to the previous slide? There we go. Describe what UNOS is, where we come from, why we do the work that we do. And I'll conclude my part with how you can get involved, and then we'll go back to Bob, and he can tell you a little more about his experience as a board member and committee member for UNOS. So UNOS is a nonprofit in Richmond, Virginia. We have about 400 folks on the staff there in Richmond, and we have another 1,000 volunteers in various capacities. So it's very much a volunteer-driven organization. The volunteers ultimately make all the strategic decisions and all the policy decisions. We support that through IT work. About 40% of our workforce are IT. and through data analysis and policy writing support staff. We do a handful of other things that we'll talk about, but UNOS really is people. So there's the 400 of us there in Richmond, but we are across the country. We're a membership organization in which all the transplant programs and all the OPOs in the United States participate and offer volunteers for board, for committees, for review boards to participate in public comment processes and other things. It's a very wide-ranging, very inclusive organization, and it includes a large number of very active patients. Some of them candidates, more often recipients, but certainly patient voices and donor family voices are very well represented in our organization and in our policymaking discussions. So next slide, please. So what exactly do all these people do? So we do a number of things. The thing that sort of is at the core of all of the work we do is that we maintain the wait list. So when you're put on a wait list by a transplant center, all that clinical information about you is in our database. There is one single national wait list database. And it really is more of a database than a list. The list is generated brand new each time a donor organ is available. And so a list of candidates for that organ, which is based on where the organ is, what the blood type of the donor is, what type of organ it is, and all the other policy factors that go in. So the idea of a wait list is a little fuzzy because it really only occurs when there's an actual organ. So we really refer to that as the database more than we do the wait list. But that's where everybody's information is. Everybody's information is held in that. When an OPO identifies a donor and is able to recover organs, they enter that donor information into our waitlist database. And at that point, the list is produced and the OPO is able to go down the list, contact all the transplant programs on behalf of their candidates and ask them if that's the right organ for the candidate that the computer has put at that point on the list. So that's sort of that IT system, that communication system, that database is really at the heart of what we do. In order to make that happen, there's a lot of policy writing. So there are policies that govern the allocation system. The computer, every decision that the computer is making is driven by a rule that has been hashed out in a committee that has been put out for public comment and that's been approved by the board of directors. The decisions at the moment of offering the organ are made by the computer and not by individuals who are looking at the donor and trying to decide for themselves which candidate to go to. At that point, sort of in the moment, the offer is being made by the computer according to the rules that have been developed by the participants in the system. We also are, because of all the data collection that we do, we're a resource for a lot of researchers. We do some of our own research. We do quality improvement research and tools for programs and for OPOs. And a lot of researchers look at our database. Generally, when they do that, it's de-identified. There are some rare cases where they're able to be more to see more of the information. But in most cases, they're getting a subset of the information to do research on what types of patients seem to be more successful. We do allocation research to see whether there are types of patients that should be moved up on the list instead of maybe where they are. So there's a lot of data work that goes on at UNOS. And then finally, we do a lot of advocacy. We do a lot of public discussion of the benefits of donation and transplant and try to encourage everybody to sign up to be an organ donor, to support that decision if a family member has made that, and to make sure that the gift of life is possible for as many people as possible, because we know how many people are waiting. Next slide, please. So in the moment then, how does that happen? And so We've talked about this, this massive database. There are 111,000 patients right now whose information is in our database. That includes information about what hospital they're being treated by. It includes clinical information. It includes timing information, how long they've been there, how long they've been at different statuses, including what offers they've received in the past. And all that information is in that system. And then an OPO employee, or in this case on the slide, this is a member of our staff. We have an organ center that works 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and really tends to step in to help OPOs with the trickier cases. That for the most part, donors are all allocated by the OPOs and not by the organ center. But the organ center is a resource there to offer assistance or to step in if there's a need for that. They put that donor information into the computer, and that generates the list for that candidate. So a donor with 4 organs to donate would have 4 different lists generated based on their based on the characteristics of those organs. I'm sorry, an OPO is the Organ Procurement Organization. The Organ Procurement Organization is the group like Gift of Hope that goes out to hospitals, talks to families, works with hospitals to actually coordinate the recovery of the organ. That's what the OPOs do. So they will put that donor information in the computer. That'll generate the list. They will contact transplant centers, and they'll simply work their way down the list until they find a center that is willing to accept the organ. There may be reasons not to accept the organ. There may be reasons that it meets the minimum criteria according to the computer, but still is not clinically the right organ for that candidate. It could be that the candidate has had a medical issue, so recently that it hasn't been updated in the computer, and they're not really ready for a surgery right now. There could be a number of reasons that an organ gets turned down by the candidate at the top of the list, and so the OPO staff or the organ center staff will work their way down that list. At that point, for kidneys, the organ is usually transported. For livers and hearts and lungs, usually the center that's going to transplant the organ actually goes out and recovers that organ themselves and takes it with them to back to the transplant hospital and does the transplant there. So next slide. So that makes this list generating process pretty all important to the candidates that are on it. So how do you, as a candidate on the wait list, know that that the list is done right? How do you know who's doing it? How do you get to be a part of the process that makes those rules? So all of this is done very transparently. We have a website that I'll mention in a minute that has all the proposed rules on it. We do that twice a year. There aren't any out right now, but there will be in August and September. That has all the proposed rules for anyone to read and comment on. Committee meetings are open to people to call in and listen to. And there are committees across our network on all kinds of topics. So all the organs have a committee. There are committees for constituent groups. There are committees for professional groups. And all of these are looking at a specific aspect of the donation and transplant system and making rules for those. And the way that committees work, they are partially elected from across the country. About half the committee are elected from among the transplant hospitals or OPOs in each region of the country. And then the other half are appointed by the elected leader of the board, who looks for balance, who usually appoints the patients. The patients tend not to be elected as often, but the presidential appointment allows for us to get patients onto these committees, and maybe other professions that aren't as well represented, or other geographic or diversity of other types that we need to include in the committees. So those committees will look at data, that database generated from every donor, every candidate in the United States for the last 35 years. They'll look at that data and determine what they believe the right thing to do is. If they want to justify a type of disease moving up higher on the wait list, they'll use that data to show whether or not candidates with that disease have a shorter life expectancy and therefore are more urgent and should be moved to the top of the list. And other people who look at the data differently may argue back, but they will also debate that based on the data that they're looking at from the database to determine what's really happening. We've got a very science-driven, evidence-driven process to adopt new policies. Once a committee has recommended a new policy, they'll put it out for public comment. And our website will have all those items that are being considered for policy. It also has all the policies that are in place currently on the website, and they'll collect information from anybody who wants to comment on the website. We also hold 11 meetings a year in the spring and 11 meetings in the fall throughout the United States in person, where we go out and we present these proposed policies and ask for feedback on those. And so those meetings include clinicians, and they include organ recovery staff, and they include patients and donor family members as well. Finally, after considering all that public feedback, the committee will finalize the proposal and send it to the board of directors. The board of directors includes Bob Goodman now. It also used to include my good friend Jim Gleason, whose name I saw pop up there a few minutes ago, so I know Jim is on the call today, and has always included strong patient voices. In fact, we have had one chair of the board, a chair of the national board of the organ transplant system, who was a patient. She was a living donor to her sister, Betsy Walsh, out of Charlotte, North Carolina. So that goes to the board. The board is broadly representative, patients, doctors, OPOs, and other professionals represented from across the country, and they make the final decision of whether to approve a new rule or a new policy. Next slide, please. So how do you get to find out more about this? Well, Bob sort of hinted that there were that there's sort of two roles here. UNOS is the nonprofit organization that employs that staff, that recruits the volunteers, that really does the work. The Organ Procurement and Transplant Network, the OPTN, is another name and another acronym that you'll hear a lot. The government allows a nonprofit, and at this point, and in fact, so far, at every point, it's been UNOS. But the government chooses a nonprofit to be the Organ Procurement and Transplant Network. And that's where we get our authority to make the rules from. In 1984, the government decided that a bunch of different regional approaches and a bunch of sort of unconnected ones without government oversight was not the best way to do it, and created a single national network. But at the same time, they thought that national network should be in the private sector and not be a government agency. And so every 5 years or so, they offer a contract out to be the Organ Procurement and Transplant Network, and UNOS bids for that contract. And often there have been other bidders for that contract, but we have been successful so far, I think, based on our experience and our outcomes. So there, you can find most of the policy information on that OPTN webpage, and you can find a lot of advocacy information, patient information, more general how does transplant work kind of information on the UNOS webpage. Next slide, please. So the big question is, how do you get involved? And there's a couple of ways to do that. There's really a lot of ways to do that. The easiest way is to read the website and offer a public comment. You don't even have to leave your living room for that. You can come to a regional meeting when they're in your area, and the regional meeting schedule is on both of those websites. If you want to do a little more than that, UNOS ambassadors are the way in for a lot of people. We help with speaking events. We'll give you materials and talking points and advice on how to help spread the word about donation in your community. And you can participate in a lot of ways as an ambassador, and that's we can help support probably an infinite number of ambassadors, and that is a lot of people's sort of first entry point to the UNOS system. Next slide, please. To be on one of those national committees, those are a little harder to get on because they're just not as many spots, but they are broad-based. We are always looking for new patient and donor family participants and getting them involved on the committees and on the board. There are 20 committees, as we showed in the slide a couple of slides back. And the board of directors is 1/4 patients and donor family members. So there are lots of spots for patients to participate in this way. We're looking for folks at this level who have been involved in some way. It doesn't have to be with us. It could have been through an organization like TRIO. It could have been through the OPO. It could have been a lot of different ways. But this is a step up. This is a more advanced role in the community. But this gives people an opportunity to make a direct impact in the way that that committees make their decisions and in what the policies are ultimately that drive how transplants get allocated. Next slide. I think we're going back to Bob now to talk about his own experience as a committee and board member.
Thanks, Brian. Am I up?
Yeah.
Tanya? Yep. Okay. So I mentioned earlier that I have been a member of the Hospital University of Pennsylvania's Patient Family Advisory Council, PFAC as we call it, as many people call it. And at my first meeting in November of 2014, we all go around the table telling everyone, who we are, what our backgrounds are, why we're there, that sort of thing. And at the end of the meeting, some guy comes up to me and says, "Hi, my name's Jim Gleason." And I said, "Hi, Jim, how are you?" He said, "You'd be perfect for UNOS." So I said, "What's UNOS?" And that's how my what's UNOS is defined for me. And as a result of spending a fair amount of time with Jim and some others from UNOS, I decided to throw my hat in the ring. They asked that if I would be interested in becoming an at-large member of what's called the Membership Professional Standards Committee, the MPSC, which is basically a quality assurance program in many ways anyway. And so on July 1st of, I guess it was 2015, excuse me, I started my 2-year term as an at-large member of the MPSC. I was the only non-clinical person on that committee. So I was the only one not involved in transplant, really, other than being a patient. And it was an absolutely fascinating and terrorizing at times experience, only because so many things are just way over your head as a non-clinician. But it was a wonderful experience and a great opportunity to get to know something about UNOS and the OPTN and how it all operates and everything that sits behind it. As I was finishing my term, I was asked, because of some of my other background, if I would become an advisor to the Finance Committee, and I said, absolutely. And several months later, someone from the board and another patient, she was, I believe, a kidney transplant recipient, had to resign from the board because of business reasons. Apparently her business really was taking off and she just didn't have the time to commit any longer to her being a board member. And so they asked if I would consider becoming a board member. It didn't take me very long to say yes. All of maybe 3 or 4 seconds, perhaps that long anyway. And so in December of that year, I guess it was 2017, 18, I became a board member, and I've been a board member ever since. A bit over a year ago, or maybe a year and a half or so ago, I was asked to consider becoming the treasurer of UNOS, which carries with it being the chair of the Finance Committee, as well as remaining a board member and being on the Executive Committee and the Corporate Affairs Committee, which is just UNOS only. The others are both the OPTN and UNOS. And I was very, very lucky to win a little contest, and so I was voted in, and it's been a great experience for me. So if you could move to the next slide. And so I guess I want to tell you a little bit about, and I've already referred to it already, but being involved in the entire transplant community, which by the way includes me being a member of the Team Philadelphia. I was in Salt Lake City 2 years ago and was hoping to be in Northern Jersey this year. It'll have to be next year. But being part of the community has been a wonderful physical and mental activity for me. And I say mental, it should be obvious. This is not for the lighthearted. There's a lot of detail, a lot of data, a lot of the whole notion of policies and making those kinds of decisions about policies and having you're making comments about them is really pretty intense, quite frankly, most of the time. And then from a physical standpoint, I've always been an athlete. Did my first half marathon back in 1981. I've done 27 altogether, including 3 since receiving my heart transplant. And part of it is because I want to stay alive and I want to be healthy, clearly. But part of it is that when I hear stories about other people who have had heart transplants, lung transplants, and everything else, many of whom don't take care of themselves and don't do the right thing, which also helps explain why I'm involved with the American Heart Association too, quite frankly. It continues to give me the drive to work out almost every day. And I can assure you, my wife and my daughter will attest to the fact that it may not be literally every day, but it's pretty darn close. So it has given me a lot of meaning. It has helped answer the questions that I asked, that I sort of posed to my wife 6 days after my transplant. I was about 24, 28 hours out of being in an induced coma post-transplant. And I said to her, I said, Patty, I don't know why I got this heart. And I said, I sure as hell don't know why I got it so quickly. All I know is we need to do something about this. And so that started the path of how do we give back and what do we give back and under what circumstances. And for me, I'm not a guy that loves to sit around at tables and handing out brochures and things like that, or stuffing envelopes, which I've done, by the way. I like the policy things. I like sort of the political things and that sort of stuff. So it just seemed to me, UNOS and some other things were just sort of natural for my future. And I honestly, I actually do love it. It's a lot of fun. I get to meet incredible people like Brian. Jim Gleason has been such a mentor for me. And I thank him almost every day for being a part of my life. And he's been great. And we only live about 15 minutes from one another, which is actually kind of cool. And one last comment, and that is, I wouldn't be here without my donor. And so every day, you thank your donor and you thank your donor family. And whether you ever get to connect with them or not, I have not so far, although I do write every year. Kind of doesn't matter. You do need, at least for me anyway, I thank them virtually every day.